Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, dear students. I am recording this lecture at the morning, so I must say good morning. But you would be watching this lecture at, I think, afternoon, so good afternoon. And I think you are well after your midterm exam. That's why I have, curtailed the lecture which we had decided in the previous class that you people would be reading this much of the material and we would be talking. But I think we don't have much time after the midterm exam. So let's start. The main title of the chapter is Overview of the Main Pedagogical Approaches for Translation. Before I move forward to the next page, I want to mm, prepare your mind, so mentally be prepared, because this chapter has been taken from a PhD thesis, and the language that is usually used in that at that level, PhD level, is a little bit philosophical and technical, because the writers, they assume that the readers, they know each and everything, so they do not give the background information when they of course write about something. So you will feed some missing links or gaps when you read this. But anyhow, this will be compensated with the help of these lectures, inshallah. So the chapter points are this. Chapter has introduction, and then error oriented approach, and then context sensitive literalist approach, and then text oriented approach. Number 5 is process oriented approach, and number 6 is multi dimensional approach for a translation pedagogy. In this very short lecture, I shall only discuss introduction quickly, and we shall start error oriented approach and confine to the definition of translation error, and the remaining part shall be discussed in the next lecture, inshallah. So this PPT consists of the introduction, and of course part of introduction is the section briefs and error oriented approach and meaning of an error in translation. In the introduction, we can say that these approaches that have been discussed in this chapter or elsewhere, all the pedagogical approaches for translation and interpretation are, are influenced by many areas, but he has discussed these three areas, rather mentioned these three areas. Number one is the linguistics. I think we don't need to talk about too much because we have already discussed this in the previous one of the previous lectures. And the main point here in the linguistic is the foreign language teaching methods are copied here in teaching translation. Translation studies, product or process method, product oriented approaches for translation pedagogy or process oriented approaches for translation pedagogy. This is not specific to translation studies, actually. This is related to the lifestyle as well. This is related to education, of course, in general, and all the subjects that are taught in almost all the levels, right from the primary to the tertiary level, and existing teaching methods, where that is the research that is being done in the area of education, and specifically the teaching methods in that particular area. Section brief, section 3.1 deals, which is of course the uh, error oriented approach, deals with the traditional error oriented approach to translation pedagogy, and this is the most common approach in the translation class. And this approach is closely linked to foreign language teaching, as it has been said earlier. And in this section, the author is talking about the discussion on errors in detail, of course, and we shall also discuss this, inshallah, and also causes for translation errors. And there is another point, although I have not written here, that the considerations for the teachers, pedagogical considerations for the teachers to be kept in mind while they teach translation courses. Section 2, which is 3.2, covers the approach taken by Peter Newmark, which could be labeled as context-sensitive literalist approach. Section 3.3 explains the text-oriented approach to translation pedagogy, illustrated with these writers, Hatim and Masson's, Christian Odd and Kumpel, and Hoing's models of translation pedagogy. Section 3.4 is an extensive explanation of the new process-oriented approach to translation pedagogy. Dear students, I hope you remember very well that we touched this approach in one of our lectures, previous lectures, process-oriented approach. And probably in our discussion here, we shall not talk about this approach too much, because we have already discussed in a way we have already discussed this. But we will, inshallah, talk. We shall come back to this approach once again briefly. Advantages of this approach over the error-oriented approach, of course, the advantages and pros and cons of both the approaches and comparison. Different techniques used within the general framework of the process oriented approach. Perhaps this is the most important part, because we have discussed the concept of process oriented approach, but the techniques within the general framework of the process oriented approach are very important practically. Section 3.5, the last one, provides an explanation of the multi-dimensional approach to translation pedagogy. This is very similar. This part is very similar to the approach we discussed when we were discussing the model approach for curriculum development, an article that was discussed in 2 lectures. Okay, error-oriented approach is the error-oriented. I think it's very common sense that we take error means the focus in teaching translation or interpretation courses is on error. That the teacher teaching a translation course or interpretation course, and just indicating the errors, correcting the errors, telling about the errors, telling the student about their specific errors and so on, so forth. And this is very dominant approach in our culture right now, in language teaching, and also in translation teaching courses. But what is the meaning of error? There are 2 points here. Dominant perception about error, and number 2 is translation errors. Translation errors are necessarily different from other kinds of errors, which we can linguistic errors, although there is a gray area between linguistic errors and translation errors. But the remaining part of the translation errors are essentially different from linguistic errors. So what is the dominant perception about error? Is the error offense against linguistic conventions. It means the grammatical error, the structural and lexical, etc. If I use a feminine word, and actually I had the requirement was to use the masculine noun or verb or word, it's offense against the linguistic rules or conventions. If I want to say that I wrote this letter, so if I say for that نكتب كتبنا الخطاب, and I want to say I means a single person, it's offense against linguistic convention. And this is, of course, closely linked to foreign language teaching. Is emphasis on this, according to this perception, this linguistic error is on linguistic component of the translation. When the students they translate and they make linguistic errors, the emphasis remains on the linguistic part, where they make a mistake in verb use of the verb, in use of the noun, use of the plural, use of the they make mistake in structure. They may make mistake on a couple of lot of things related to the grammar of that particular language, which is target language. Uh, in this dominant perception about error is emphasis on SL and TL conventions, of course, because the mind is consumed in understanding the linguistic conventions of source language and also the linguistic conventions in the target language. Emphasis on the ability of analyzing text, and it's most common and popular approach in the translation classes. I think you people have also um, studied the provincial courses where the translation courses are, or translating courses are, and I'm sure that you have felt this, that most of the time, if not all time, but most of the time, you have felt that your focus was on the error, and the focus of the teacher naturally remained on the error, because this is the basic characteristics of this approach, error oriented approach. uh, but the translation error is a difference of opinion among the scholars. They have different opinions about how to define a translational error. Linguistic error is the dominant view, as we have discussed. For example, if I want to say text and I want to translate the word text English and into Arabic, and I write it with seen, I have made a linguistic error. And if I say I want to translate, I took the tea into Arabic and I say akhaztu ashai, I have made this linguistic error, maybe. Or maybe some scholars they think that this is translational error. If I want to translate this Arabic sentence yaktubul ustazu ala sabburati, and I say the teacher write on the board, I have made very clearly a linguistic error. But the scope of the translational error are totally different. Um, you see, we if a sentence, if you are as a student and if you find 10 words for a word in the source language, and you use a wrong word which does not give the complete meaning in the context of that sentence, or intended meaning in the source text, but you justify your translation that I have taken this word from the dictionary, it can be considered a translational error, not the linguistic error. uh, there is a difficulty, of course. That's why the scholars are differing on how to defining translational errors, because two or more languages are involved. Very obvious, strong reason for this difficulty. And also the error may be linked to the phase of text reception. Text reception means understanding the source text. Or B, phase of text production, means transferring that source text into the target text. This is there are three things that should be kept in mind. One is two languages are involved. Two is the phase at which the error occurred may be different. Maybe the translator made a mistake in understanding the source text, and that's why the error in his or her translation. Or maybe he did not make any mistake in the translation understanding of the source text. He made a mistake in the while transferring the meaning of that into. I'm sorry, my students, I have no control on these disturbing voices, so you have to bear with me all these voices. So phase of text production means that when the students they uh, transfer the source text into the target text. So that's why it's very, I think conceptually it is very clear that the translation errors are in their essence they are different from the linguistic errors. We can take okay, maybe little there are examples coming. Translation error may be caused by extra linguistic factors, that knowledge of the source related to the reception phase and target cultures, knowledge of the source and target culture, reception and production both. Maybe the translator's knowledge about the source culture is not sufficient, or the target culture is not sufficient. So that's why he is making this translational error. Stylistic qualities required for the target text. Maybe the translator is not aware the stylistic qualities that are required of the target text. And also translation scopos and functional requirements. Scopos, in a very quick way, we can say scopos means the why intention of translating this any text into the target language. What is the purpose of translating? And the purpose defines many things. How this translation should be text should be translated, what should be kept in mind while translating this text, and so on. The point here is when the scholars they discuss the translational error, they have all these factors surrounding the error in translation, not the linguistic error. They try to define the error in the light of all of these factors. We can take, I think we have some or all, maybe all three examples we have discussed earlier, but now I have included these examples here to for the understanding of the error. For example, da aydiyaka bima in barid, put your hands in your cold water. If we see the first translation, it is put your hands in cold water, we find that there is nothing wrong as for the linguistic conventions are concerned, because the translator is very loyal and faithful in translating da, put, aidiyaka, your hands, bima, b is in, and ma is water, and barid is cold water. But because in the first translation, because the translator perhaps is not aware does not have sufficient knowledge of the source and the text, what does it mean and how to transfer this into the target text, has made this error. Whereas the meaning is, of course, the second line, which is don't worry or be certain or relax. The idea can be in. The next example is same. ظهره مسنود. The first translation, fine linguistically is good. His back is supported, but the cultural meaning has not been transferred, and the target readers they are just wondering what does this mean. His back is supported, and he's backed up and supported by some people, and so on and so forth. مقطوع من شجرة, cut off from a tree. Another example, the first translation is 100% correct linguistically, but the cultural meaning is so important that although these examples are about the cultural meaning, but remember the translation errors also occurs when the translator deals with the terminologies, deals with the specific stylistic structures in the source or the target language, or deals with the culturally bound expressions in general, or even in items that are related to food, the items that are everywhere. It is not specific to something, but some areas are more prone towards the translational error than others. And with this, I think it's enough for today because of course, a shortage of time. So next assignment, reading assignment, is remaining part of the chapter. And also, students, please because our time is limited, and I want to now summarize the whole chapter, maybe in the next lecture, the whole one. So try to get the main point from the chapter, because I would not be talking in detail. I would be giving you the essence of each section, each yes section, or each approach, so that I want to discuss the last chapter, another lecture on the last chapter in this course, inshallah. Take very good care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.